All right, so section 1.2 looks at some different notation and how to use that. We're going to start off with inequality notation. We've all seen this growing up, and people have a really hard time with which direction the arrows point and what you can write when you're doing all of that. So we're going to go over another way that tells us the same thing. It's called interval notation. Interval notation, you either write with parentheses or brackets, and you always do the lowest number, comma, the highest number. And then again, you end it with either parenthesis or bracket. So this first one says x is greater than a. That means no matter what it is, it starts at a and can go up forever. So that's infinity. It can't actually equal a, so I put a parentheses. And you can't actually ever get infinity, so we put a parentheses. The next one is x is greater than or equal to a. So it's the same thing, start at a and go up forever. But this time you actually can equal a, so we put a parentheses, or a bracket with the a and a parentheses with the infinity. Less than, we do the same thing. We're just going down forever. So it's negative infinity to a. And then if it can equal the a, we do the bracket. Now, when you have two, like the purple ones, you're just going to write a comma b. So all three of those look exactly the same, the lowest and the highest. If it's less than, we put parentheses. If it's less than or equal to, we put a bracket. This one has one of each, so we put both. That's okay. And then the last part of this is if you have two, we write both. So we do less than a, and then we do greater than or equal to b, and we just put a u in between. So these all follow the same rules, and you don't have to worry about what direction your arrow's facing. So we're going to use interval notation a lot in this class. If it says interval notation is the direction, you have to put it in interval notation. If it doesn't, you do whatever works better for you. All right, let's talk about domain and range. Domain is all x values that have to do with whatever you're talking about. So if I'm looking at a down here, the domain, I'm just going to list the x values. So it's 1, -2, and 3. -2 and 3. And when you're just listing points, you use brackets and parentheses. So domain, I don't understand. One, -2, 3. For B, the domain is -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. For C, the domain is -4 and -2. We don't have to write the -2 twice. On graphs, we just look literally at the x values. So if this was our axis, the smallest x value is right here on the circle, so that would be 1. And the highest x value is right here, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5. So 7.5. When the shape goes off the graph and it has arrows on both sides, it's negative infinity to infinity. And that doesn't matter if they're pointing up or down. Each arrow represents an infinity. Now let's talk about range. Range is all y values. So we do the same process, we're just looking at the y's. So for this one, we have 2, 5, and -1. Here we have 1, 0, 1, 2, 2. So 1, 0, and 2, because we don't have to repeat them. And then this one is 1, 1, and 0, so we just have to put 1 and 0. Graphs are the same thing. We're just looking at the y's this time. So the lowest y is about 1.5, And the highest y is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's that range. When it goes up and down forever, same thing, negative infinity to infinity. Versus f, they both go up. So we know it's going to go to positive infinity. To get the lowest, we just find the lowest y on the graph, which is 1. So there's our domain and range. Now we're going to talk about relations versus functions. A relation is any set of points. So all of these are relations. A, B, and C are literally a set of points. D, E, and F are graphs, so they're all relations. A function is a special relation that every x has one y value. One y. Meaning if I put in a number in an x, it's always going to be a y. If I get a different y, it's not a function. So let's look at some of these. The first one here for f, all of our x's are different, so that means there's no way we can get a different y. So f is okay, we can call it a function. G, same thing. All of our x's are different, so it doesn't matter about the y's, so that's also a function. H, we have -2 twice. So now we have to look at the y. If those numbers were the same, it would be a function. Because they're different, it's just a relation. It's not a function because we have different y's. On a graph, you tell that with what's called a vertical line test. Draw a vertical line. If there's anywhere on the graph where the vertical line touches your graph more than once, it's not a function. So if we look at this first one, boom. Even though it jumped, it's not a function because it touches the circle in 2 places. So it's just a relation. If we look at the E, there's no place. Doesn't matter what I do, it's never going to touch that line twice. So E is a function. And F is also a function. It does the same thing. If you just have a bunch of dots on a graph, like this one would be a function because you wouldn't touch the dots more than once. But let's say I put one like that. Now that 4th dot makes it not a function. Calculators. The graphing calculators are nice because they'll actually do some graphing for you. You're going to hit the y equals button. That's in the top left. That will show you, that'll take you right to a graphing menu where you can type in equations. To get x's, you're going to use the X button, which looks like this, XT alpha N. It's right next to the alpha button. It's right next to the green button. So if I wanted to type 2x, I'd hit the 2, and then I hit that button right next to alpha, and it puts an x in for me. If I hit graph, which is the top right-hand button, it'll take me right to my graph. Now, depending on what I've done before in my calculator, you might not see the line. So a way to get where you need to go is to use zoom, which is the top middle button. And then you have some choices. Zoom 6 is standard. It brings you to a 10 by 10 view, which is what this screen is. You can zoom out, you can zoom in. We'll talk about other times you might use that zoom button, but that's a way, if you're not seeing a graph, to get back to the center and see what's going on. We'll do more with that later. The last thing we're going to talk about in this section is function notation. So that's f of x. If you see something that's written f of x equals, you know automatically it's a function. Otherwise, we couldn't write it with f of x. So that's one thing that helps you. Another thing is if you have multiple equations, you can name one f, one g, one h, and then it's easy to tell apart. F of x is no different than y. So those two things are exactly the same. One's y, one's f of x. If you are given something like this, with the 2 in the parentheses, it's saying, plug that number in for x and tell me what you get. If you get this over here where it says equals a number, you make that function equal the number and solve. So let's look at these two. For the first one, f of 2, we're going to take that equation, but instead of x, we're going to write 2, and then we're going to do the math. So 9 times 2 is 18.